Boa tarde a todos, boa tarde a todas. Boas-vindas aos convidados, aos participantes. Essa é a segunda edição do Seminário Internacional Desigualdades na Educação, Desafios para o Ensino de Ciências e Saúde. Esse evento acontece no marco do centenário do nascimento de Paulo Freire, que ocorre em setembro de 2021. O evento é organizado pelo Grupo de Estudos sobre Desigualdades na Educação em Ciências e Saúde, o GEDES, que faz parte do Laboratório de Currículo e Ensino do Instituto Nutes de Educação em Ciências e Saúde da UFRJ. Esse evento conta com o apoio da CAPES e está organizado em 3 sessões. Sessão Saberes, com mesas redondas, sessão Diálogos, onde acontecem rodas de conversa com autores de livros, e sessão Leituras do Mundo, compostas por vídeos assíncronos e conferências ao vivo. Hoje estamos na 3ª sessão Leituras do Mundo, com a participação da professora Felicia Mensah e mediação da professora Isabel Martins. Já deixamos aqui o nosso agradecimento aos tradutores, Matheus Andrade e René Silver, da Corre Traduções, e também aproveito para informar vocês que a tradução simultânea está disponível apenas para aqueles que nos acompanham pela plataforma Zoom, mas, posteriormente, essa conferência vai ser disponibilizada com a tradução no YouTube. E, para quem nos acompanha no Zoom, relembrando aqui, a opção de tradução pode ser feita clicando no símbolo de globo ou nos 3 pontinhos que ficam na parte de baixo da tela do Zoom. As perguntas podem ser feitas através desse botão de Q e A, também na parte de baixo da tela do Zoom. Quem estiver acompanhando pelo YouTube ou pelo Facebook, poderá deixar as suas perguntas no chat que acompanha a transmissão por essas redes sociais. E agora, sem mais demora, eu vou passar a palavra para Isabel Martins, professora titular do Laboratório de Linguagens e Mediações do Nutes da UFRJ, diretora do Nutes da UFRJ, editora da revista eletrônica Ciência em Tela, lead editor do periódico Cultural Studies in Science Education, Springer, licenciada em Física pela Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro e doutora em Educação pela University of London, e ela vai ser a nossa mediadora nesta tarde. Bem-vinda, professora Isabel, sejam todos bem-vindos e bem-vindas.
Obrigada, Anastácia, obrigada à organização desse evento, que tem sido um sucesso. Eu tenho tido a oportunidade de acompanhar várias das sessões e realmente estou encantada com o que essa comissão tem conseguido em termos de participação e de horizontalidade nas relações entre os participantes. Hoje é um dia muito especial, não é? Eu recebi aqui uma informação que é o Dia Internacional da Pessoa com Deficiência, eu não sabia disso. E é um dia também em que a gente comemora, né, uma decisão do Supremo Tribunal Federal do Brasil de suspender, claro que ainda em caráter liminar, isso ainda vai para plenário, o decreto 10.502 de 2020, que era um decreto que determinava a implementação de programas e de escolas, não é, classes especializadas, não é, para alunos com deficiência. A gente comemora que essa decisão, né, de suspender o decreto, ela vai no sentido de reforçar a inclusão, não é, como um princípio, como um imperativo, não é, e como algo que pode estar presente em todas as nossas escolas, não é, regulares. E eu acho que nesse, né, clima assim, auspicioso, a gente tem conosco a professora Felicia Mensah, que é alguém que tem, ao longo da sua vida, da sua carreira acadêmica, se dedicado a estudar questões relacionadas à inclusão e ao racismo no contexto dos currículos escolares, sobretudo das disciplinas relacionadas às ciências da natureza. A Felicia deu para a gente, não é, uma palestra que ficou gravada, várias pessoas assistiram, e essa palestra tocou em vários pontos, não é, que levantaram o nosso interesse e nos fizeram querer conversar mais. Várias pessoas mandaram perguntas. Eu estou aqui hoje para transmitir algumas dessas perguntas e fazer algumas outras. Estou aguardando as perguntas aqui no chat também. E gostaria, inicialmente, de passar a palavra para a Felícia, para que ela pudesse comentar, chamar atenção para algum ponto específico da fala dela, alguma questão que ela gostaria, né, de acrescentar, e depois passamos, então, às perguntas. Então, Felícia, por favor, você é uma convidada que a gente recebe com muito carinho, não é? A Felícia é uma pessoa que tem uma trajetória longa na educação em ciências, ela tem formação na área de ciências e também na área de educação, ela é professora titular no Teachers College, ela é uma pessoa muito comprometida com a formação de pesquisadores, ela orientou o doutorado da nossa querida Catemari Rosa, professora da Federal da Bahia, que também está conosco em diversos eventos, né? Tem atuado como editora de periódicos com excelente reputação na área e, mais do que tudo, na sua atuação docente, contribuído para a formação e para o empoderamento de vários estudantes. Então, eu passo a palavra para a Felícia para que ela possa fazer alguns comentários gerais e depois responder nossas perguntas. Bem-vinda.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank the planners and the organizers of the conference, hoping that everyone is having a wonderful time engaging. And thank you so much for your kind words, Isabel. It's very, very thoughtful of you. So for those who had an opportunity to listen to or to look at the video that I sent, I actually did that video for another presentation earlier this summer for a group of scholars who were looking at engineering and science education. And they wanted me to talk about some of my work related to inclusion and racism related to teacher education. And so I felt like when I did that presentation, I was very creative. So hopefully you all enjoy the presentation that I did. So I will want to just talk a little bit more of a conversation. So I feel like I'm just going to talk to you that are there in the audience that are listening to us, and then have a Q&A session with Isabel. But I first just want to start off telling you a little bit about who I am and how I came to do what I do. And so I grew up in North Carolina, one of the states here in the United States. It's a rural area that I grew up in. So being able to have nature, be able to go out and play, making dirt pies, dirt cakes, just really being at nature. And so for me, science was always that idea that the world was like a gigantic laboratory that I can go and play. And so that was my first introductions to science, and it has kept me that way. And so I think that's important to think about as science teachers, or even teachers in general, about what students have in their personal lives that we do not often invite into the classroom. So all the things that I did when I was a young person, running around in cornfields and, playing with insects and dissecting birds, it wasn't actually connected in my science learning. And again, I think that's really important for teachers to think about, what do students have in terms of their own personal experiences that you can invite into the learning space, whether it's science or English or whatever. And so I think for me, a lot of my work has to do with that. How do I work with teachers to see that students have very valuable experiences that you need to bring into the classroom? And so the other thing related to my experiences I want you all to know about is that I was a former high school science teacher, but before I went into the science classroom, I actually worked with Procter & Gamble, a large company that produces a lot of the products that we have in the United States, like our deodorants and our soaps and everything. But I worked in the laboratory part of that and got a chance to use the skills that I learned as a scientist in my major. And so with me having those experiences, personal experiences, then having these experiences in a lab setting, working for a large company, corporation, I feel like I bring all those pieces together that helps me to see science in a very different way. And so what I do in terms of our work is to help teachers to be able to do that as well. And I actually start with the elementary classroom. I'm a former high school science teacher. And in my experiences as a science teacher, well, first as a doctoral student, but in my experiences as a science teacher, I taught biology, which was my major when I was in college. I taught earth science and I taught physical science. And so again, it gave me an idea to see, how do all the sciences fit together? How do they work together? How can I develop curriculum where it brings this interdisciplinary focus for students and teachers to be able to learn about it? So when I was in doctoral preparation, I had a professor who was married to an elementary teacher. And he had promised his wife that he was going to take doctoral students and put them in elementary classrooms. So mind you, my program was secondary science. So he placed us in elementary classrooms. And I took my job very seriously, you know, working with little people. And they were so excited about science. They had so much fun engaging in science. And but on the opposite end of that, the teachers did not. And I was like, no, this is a very unusual space to be in, to see that students are really engaged and excited about science, but their teachers were not. And so what I did is I worked with the teacher to try to develop curriculum. I worked with the teacher to help her to develop her science content knowledge and try to make that marriage so that students and the teachers could also be very excited in science. And so I figured, you know what, I think I may want to do this a little bit more. And so I actually, in terms of my career in academia, I got a job as an elementary science educator, and I've been in that forever, seems like. That's really where my career has gone. And I love the elementary classroom because I get to see the foundations. I get to see students excited and engaged about science, but I still see where their teachers are not. And so a lot of my work has to do with that inclusion of teachers into the science classroom, to get them excited, to get them motivated, because the young ones are. And my work as a science teacher educator, I'm still situated within middle school and secondary education as well. So I want to be able to help teachers to see the trajectory of children as they move from elementary to middle to high school and to college, and the cycle of the educational system that students go through, that science will be a part of that as they move across the trajectory. So one of the scenarios that I put into my video was that if students are not engaged in elementary science education, they're not going to have the foundations for middle school. But we know a lot of things happen in the middle school ages where students start to not be as engaged. They start to lose interest. Then they go off to high school and they're like, I really hate science. And then they go off to college and not take science at all. So we're missing many, many years across that trajectory. And again, this idea of inclusion, a very broadly defined definition of inclusion, where we want to invite all students into the learning of science. But as students continue to move across the educational trajectories, they fall off. And sometimes people call it the pipeline, that the pipeline gets cut off as students continue to move along. And so again, my work as a science teacher educator is to allow that trajectory for a child as they are moving through the education system to continue to maintain their excitement and interest within science. Now, overlay that with issues of race and racism, so it becomes more compounded, because now we have the issue where a lot of Black and Brown and Indigenous people are not engaging in science because a lot of the schools are not teaching them science. So here in the United States, a lot of elite schools that have lots of wealth and lots of resources, students are getting a science education. Those tend to be our populated by white schools predominantly. So therefore, we have a lot of our urban schools, a lot of our rural schools that are also kind of poorly resourced, do not have really great science education experiences. Going back again to the idea that their teachers don't have the science content knowledge, don't have the resources. And so there's this division, these inequities of those who have science and those who do not have science. And so again, I think a lot of the work that I do is to try to make people aware of what that division looks like, and how if we don't have more of an equitable, inclusive distribution of science learning, that the field is going to suffer. We're going to suffer from not having knowledge. We're going to suffer from not having the knowledge that people bring from their own particular cultural viewpoints, their experiences, and all of that. So one of the other major points that I want to make out of the video, if you thought about it, is the next compounded issue is less teacher education. So when we think about teacher education, predominantly professors are also white. And so we still have this idea that if we don't have faculty of color and faculty with diverse experiences, then we're not educating our teachers and doing professional development with our teachers for them to also see diverse perspectives and to be able to see and be a little bit more inclusive in their practices as well. So all these issues are compounded and all these issues excite me about the work that I do as a science teacher educator. Even though I'm in science, I still have interests related to the interdisciplinary connections between content areas. So definitely at the elementary level, elementary teachers are considered to be generalists, which means they teach not only science, but mathematics, English language, social studies, and all those different content areas in that elementary grade. So I work with teachers to do interdisciplinary teaching of how they connect science learning with mathematics or engineering, thinking about the STEM, STEM, or how can they think about the connection of social issues related to science learning as well. So I find that what I do excites me, because I try to think about it setting the foundations for young people as they move through the educational system, and that the important role is like the critical and important role of having a really great teacher that can see the connections between science and other content areas and then prepare their students in that particular way. So that was pretty much my video, I think, is trying to make those connections between the importance of what inclusion means in a very broad sense of what it means to teach science and be able to teach everyone science, and everyone has this joy and this fulfillment of being able to learn science.
É muito interessante a forma pela qual você relata a sua experiência pessoal, não é? E como você está implicada nessas questões, né? E eu fiquei pensando aqui que além dessa dimensão pessoal, existe uma dimensão institucional também, no que a gente pode chamar nessa luta pela inclusão, na luta por uma educação antirracista. No Brasil, nós tivemos, há quase 20 anos, uma lei, né, que tornou obrigatória o ensino da história e da cultura africana nas escolas de educação básica. E essa, vamos dizer, essa mudança propiciou, não é, ou tem propiciado, porque isso é algo que se desdobra, né, ao longo do tempo, uma maior conscientização, não é, tanto do ponto de vista da formação dos professores quanto do desenvolvimento dos currículos, da importância, não é, de se trazer essa discussão mais proximamente, não é? Eu queria perguntar para você, do ponto de vista institucional, o que você destacaria como políticas públicas ou reformas curriculares que tenham sido cruciais, que tenham sido chave, não é, nessa luta pela inclusão e pela educação antirracista nos Estados Unidos?
Okay, that's a huge question, Isabel. I think what the challenge that we have in the United States is that we have 50 states and other territories, and they're very different. So each state has their own curriculum. They adopt their own curriculum. They can adopt their own textbooks. Even at the level of the state, you may go down to district levels. And so there are different districts that will have different curriculum, and they get to decide what they want, even to the level of the classroom where you have the teacher deciding like how they actually may take this curriculum and actually teach it to students. So I think at that institutional level, there are so many different levels, so we don't have a centralized curriculum. Each state, we don't even really have centralized science standards or standards even across all the different other curriculum. So that makes it extremely challenging. And so to be able to think about how at the institutional level is to kind of think about how can you move up and down kind of that continuum of the state to the district, to the classroom, to the teacher, kind of like moving back and forth between that. So what I do in terms of trying to work with teachers and my pre-service teachers, and even working with my doctoral students to think about is like, how can you have a little bit more of ownership over the curriculum as the classroom teacher? So being able to invite these these different perspectives within the curriculum. I love the idea that, that Brazil has this new law to be able to teach about Black history. And again, we don't necessarily have that here in the States. And so it may be certain teachers that may feel that, oh, I want to be able to teach a little bit more African-American and Black history, and others may not at all. So we do have February is Black History Month. And that tends to be the time where we get a lot of that, but it's also very superficial. So there has to be a lot more work at the institutional level to be able to see much more of the supports around how to teach different perspectives, especially around Black education, or being able to teach about, I feel like this is just like a really huge question and it's really challenging to be able to answer. But I think the way that I approach it is to try to help teachers at that level of their classroom, or how to help teachers, through my teacher education program, to be able to help them to find resources that they can do that for their own curriculum. I also work within schools to work on teams of teachers to be able to try to do that as well. But I wish there were some kind of a much more institutionalized way to be able to think about curriculum, but we are in many ways constrained by having kind of like their own autonomy of different states and different districts for education.
When you, eu ia falar em inglês, vê se pode. Na sua fala, você também mencionou algo sobre a relação entre desigualdade social e racismo. Como você descreveria essa relação, não é, hoje? O que já mudou ao longo dos últimos anos?
I feel hopeful about what has happened in the past year. And it's very, very unfortunate that it took a global pandemic for us to try to think about issues around inequity and racism. Racism is not new, but it's new to a lot of people to think about it at this particular level. But again, it's very unfortunate that we had to go through all of this to be able to start having more deep conversations about the impact of racism and inequalities. And so because I am in education, and because I do have a background in science, I see them connected together. So how do we even think about educational inequities? And how do we even think about science inequities and how science has, in many ways, contributed to those inequities? And, I still see this too as another large issue to be able to talk about. But I think a lot of the things that are concerned us around social inequities, around educational inequities, are always going to be big. And so I continually talk to people about, yes, we know that they're big, but they're not too big that we can not do something about them. And, and having to think about in your own space and time, how can you contribute to solutions that can help? How can you contribute to giving your perspectives that can help and to open up even more conversations? And so I think about it in those terms. We have to be able to be more open, to be able to listen to what people have to say, and not be so quick to dismiss their ideas if it's not what you have experienced yourself. And I think we just need to have more conversations, more communications around the impact of different things and what it happens to, and how it affects different people, especially like with COVID-19. How is that affecting your community? How is it affecting another community? What are the things that we have in common that we need to talk about to find some solutions between what is going on? But, the other unfortunate thing about what's happening here in the US, and I would imagine this is happening on a global scale, is that people have an opportunity to be more creative. And I'm not seeing a lot of creativity in what's going on, not really bringing people together to see how we can find better solutions about what's going on. And so I think these ideas around social inequities have to be social. It involves the communication between different people to be able to kind of understand and to come up with ways of being able to think creatively, to think outside of the box, to not do the same things that we've always done before. People talk about new normal. I don't know if you all talk about the new normal there in Brazil, but that's one of the phrases that are often spoken about. And people are like, well, we don't really want to go back to what we had before. You know, these ideas around inclusion and exclusion, like, why would we want to go back to something that has produced even greater inequities? And now we see them and we want to go back. So again, I think this is an opportunity for us to think a little bit more creatively about how can we be more inclusive? How can we take on these issues that we have at a global level, but even at the level of the classroom, at the level of our communities, at the level of the state, that we can find some solutions to a lot of these bigger issues. But I think big issues are always going to be present. It's how do we address them, and how do we come together to address them?
Essa discussão sobre questões sociais, né, que atravessam a sociedade, ela de fato é muito importante e tem implicações muito concretas, né, para o trabalho curricular, para a formação dos professores, e muitas vezes ela se conecta com questões mais amplas na sociedade. Nesse sentido, eu trago uma pergunta que foi feita aqui pela Andréia Maria Brandão Meireles. Foi uma pessoa que assistiu a sua fala, né, o seu vídeo, e ela está um pouco preocupada em como é possível, não é, trazer os movimentos sociais, não é, essa discussão mais ampla, né, que acontece em nível social, e as suas agendas, as suas reivindicações para o currículo escolar. Ela se diz principalmente, né, particularmente preocupada, porque, aqui nas palavras dela, ela diz: nós temos um governo que insiste em afirmar que não há racismo no Brasil e que vem desmantelando e enfraquecendo ações afirmativas. Nesse cenário, como é que nós podemos nos organizar para um contradiscurso? E como fortalecer a luta pela inclusão em um cenário social tão excludente? Essa é a dúvida da Andréia, que ela quer compartilhar com você.
Yes, that was a tough question. That was a very tough question. You know, when I think about the idea of social movements, at the core, you have to know what you're fighting for. And you have to know that the fight oftentimes is bigger than you, but you still have to keep fighting. You know, because I often think about the things that happened, you know, pre-me, in terms of thinking about the civil rights movement here in the United States. You know, this was pre-me, you know, when I was, tell a little bit of my age. So, you know, I wasn't even born yet. And so these things around how I came through education and the impact of the social, you know, the civil rights movement and everything, with me having to go back and learn about that, and actually learn it from the perspective of how passionate and how committed they were, knowing that they were fighting for something in the future, which was me. And so I think we have to keep that in mind. We often want to have social movements that the impact is going to be right now in the very moment. Few of them happen like that. You're actually fighting now for a better future for people later, you know, and so we do have to know what we're fighting for, and to know that our efforts will have an impact. We never really know at what extent will we have that impact, but we still have to be in the fight to know that it will. And I think that's the part that keeps the hopefulness, because fighting can actually be very hard and discouraging. But if you say, you know, may not see anything now, but I'm fighting for, you know, for me, I'm fighting for the young children who are going to go into science classrooms, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years from now. And so, you know, the change is often very, very slow. So I think, you know, when we have people who are not, you know, even thinking about government, when we have people who do not see their role and they see their role in some ways as being very, disconnected from the people. That's when you also have issues, and that also makes you want to have to fight even more. Because if you're not allowed, I'm trying to think about this in terms of government, because like we're here in the United States, again, it's like our government, we have a larger government in terms of our president, but we also have individual states. And so they're all, you know, sometimes there are issues at the individual state that don't always coincide with what's happening at the greater United States. And so the ideas that I might be fighting for, that anybody might be fighting for, kind of at the state level, may not actually arise to the level of the entire country. And so I think when we have social movements that sometimes they won't arise to the level of the greater country, but they're the movements that you have in the moment. But now, again, because of the global pandemic, we are all, you know, the United States, lots of people, lots of states, you know, are fighting for racial equality. They're fighting for the rights around gun control. They're fighting for many, many, many issues. But rarely do we have it where the government is going to come in at that larger country level. You know, so you want to be able to think about where are you in the greater scheme of what is happening, that you fight at the local level. And many people fighting at the local level can come together, and it grows to the point where maybe it's going to be much larger. But rarely are social movements, rarely are they going to rise to the larger level that they're going to meet meet the larger countries' issues, because we're so separated and so siloed within our individual states. I'm not sure if I answered that, but I mean, but that was kind of how I thought about it when the question was presented.
Eu imagino, essa discussão ela é uma discussão interessante porque ela nos exige um deslocamento, não é? Um deslocamento ao longo de diferentes espaços sociais, papéis sociais, né, relações com instituições. Então, como você diz, é algo que tem uma representação institucional, mas que se materializa no cotidiano da escola, e esse caminho, né, somos nós mesmos, né, que fazemos. Então, o deslocamento entre todos esses níveis é algo que desafia muito. A outra pergunta que eu tenho aqui para te fazer é uma pergunta que foi feita pela Pamela Teixeira. A Pamela, ela fez a pergunta dela em inglês, e ela, na verdade, a pergunta dela se conecta com uma das perguntas que apareceram no nosso Q&A agora. Então, eu vou ler aqui a pergunta da Pamela. Ela diz assim: First of all, I thank you for the amazing lecture. As a Black student and now a Black science teacher, it meant a lot to me. Considering the coronavirus pandemics and the explosion of fake news, with governments denying the disease and how serious it is, and science being challenged, not only by the virus, but also by a great part of society, what consequences and challenges could be faced by us, science teachers, in the classroom? E eu acho que essa questão, essa preocupação com essa ação do professor na sala de aula, nesse contexto que tem ramificações tão amplas, ela também aparece na pergunta do Klinger Cleio Bernardes, nosso aluno, que pergunta como, diante dessa diversidade de possibilidades de abordar, não é, o currículo, como é possível, nesse contexto, né, pensar numa avaliação em larga escala, se ela existe nos Estados Unidos em nível nacional, e talvez eu acrescentaria que sentido, não é, teria desenvolver uma pauta, não é, para avaliar um currículo antirracista. Como é que nós poderíamos avaliar um currículo inclusivo, um currículo antirracista, considerando a diversidade de cenários, de possibilidades, né, e de instituições e pessoas envolvidas?
Yeah. No, thank you for those questions. I think the first thing that really comes to me to kind of encapsulate it all is this idea around science literacy. And being able to not only educate teachers around what the importance is of knowing science, but our larger community. So one of the things that really is unfortunate when we think about, again, everything that's happening with COVID-19 as a pandemic, is that people are not smart. They don't understand what is actually going on, the science behind everything that's going on, the data that's being presented. And we have to do a better job at helping people to understand that this information is important for you to know, to be able to act upon. So these ideas around critical literacy, even beyond science, but science is the content area, but even just to read critically and to ask questions about what is in front of you, we're not doing a great job of that. And I think we're going to have to do much better than that. You can watch different news shows and they may be talking about the same story, but then as a consumer of that news, what is your opinion? What do you think? And I used to have these activities when I was a high school teacher, that I had students to watch the evening news to see different news stations, because that's where you get different perspectives. And then we come back to class and we talk about what was discussed on X news, or how did so-and-so discuss this. We get the newspaper article and we read it. So they have all these different versions, all these different perspectives, and then you come up with your conclusion. So it's like we can't have one person saying this is fake news when you have 50 million other people saying, like, no, it's not. It's true. Look at this. But it's like we have to do a much better job at educating people around how do you take in this information and make sense of it? How do you have conversations with other people around the information that is contained out there? And you can start that in school. As I said before, children are going to go through school from, the earliest grades of pre-kindergarten through college, and you don't develop that every year. And then we have students who are then we have people that graduate and now they're out in the world having to make decisions about climate change, making decisions about a vaccine, should they get vaccinated, making decisions about, all kinds of things related that has implications not only for themselves, but their families and for larger communities. And so to me, that's the importance of being able to have these scientific and these literacy skills so that people can be better consumers of the information that is out there. So it turns back to the idea of what is anti-racist curriculum, because if we take this information that is out there around everything that's going on with COVID, and we show people data tables, and this is the part where I'm also a little bit critical of science myself, to think about, okay, here's a data table. Well, it is what it is. Well, it is what it is, but let's think about it through a social lens. Let's think about it through a racial lens. Let's think about it through a capitalist lens. So it's like, if the rates are going up in a particular area, who's living in that area? Why are they more affected than another group of people? What resources do they have in this particular community? So you have to start asking these additional questions, and then it makes a lot more sense about it. So science often thinks about it being very objective. If I present this data table to you, it's objective. But the way we understand that data table is very subjective. And so we have to get people to understand, how do you bring those two things together? And I often think, too, that this is where we have to make sure that the ideas around an anti-racist curriculum, or ideas of how you reform your curriculum, is that you only do it by bringing in different perspectives, that we cannot just look at this data table and say it is what it is and that's the truth. No, let's look at it again through different lenses. Let's look at it through different questions. Let's look at it through different impacts that this particular data would have. That's how you become a little bit more of a critical consumer of this information, of the science. And it also allows people to be able to think. It allows people to be able to question and not take things for granted. And again, going back, we have to do a much better job of that in our educational system. And science is one of those ways that we can do that.
É interessante, né, que essa forma, né, de pensar a ciência de forma crítica, né? Ela é muito necessária, né, para que a gente possa se posicionar. Tem uma pergunta aqui da Yasmin Lanati, que eu acho que toca, né, e, de certa forma, desdobra essa discussão, né, que você acabou de começar a fazer. Ela pergunta como é que nós podemos discutir questões, né, raciais, né, na educação, em ciências, se alguns dos princípios epistemológicos, não é, da ciência, da própria educação em ciências, estão baseados em valores e pressupostos que são eurocêntricos e alguns deles até relacionados, não é, ao que a gente chama de racismo científico. Como é que a gente, então, compatibiliza, não é, essas demandas?
Yeah, I love this question. I love this question. You know, first of all, scientific racism is not new. We've always had to contend with scientific racism. And so just recently, I would say probably in the 2 or 3 months or so, I'm actually looking more deeply into these ideas around scientific racism and Black women. And so I just read a book. I don't know if you can see the book. And, it's talking about Black feminism, Black women agency, and the new Black feminism. And there was a section in the book that talks about how do we know about the Black body in terms of the anatomy. And so I didn't really know who this person was. And I think this is another default to be able to answer a question a little bit earlier around, like, we need to be able to have different perspectives brought into the curriculum that really addresses ideas around race and racism. And so as I was thinking about this, she has an example in the book. So there's this scientist named Dr. J. Marion Sims. He's considered the father of gynecology, the father of modern gynecology, and all of that. And so, he's esteemed as this really great physician and surgeon. But how did he get to be that? And so I'm going back and I've been reading that he's actually did a lot of his work, really all of his work, on enslaved Black women. And so being able to understand the body, being able to understand the internal makeup of the female body, he was harming and experimenting on Black women's bodies, not giving them anesthesia. Because they was thinking that Black women had a higher threshold of pain, and so there's no need for them to have anesthesia. This whole idea of the humanity, so dehumanizing Black women and all of that. And I was like, for the sake of science. I was never taught this. Like I said, I'm just now reading about it. I was never taught this in my education. And so we do have all of these ideas around scientific racism, Eurocentrism, that we have to go back and understand where all this is coming from and not take this stuff for granted, and really go back and reclaim and claim back the knowledge that we have. We often think about, things only starting in knowledge being Eurocentric. Like, what about knowledge that came from Africa? We don't teach our children about that. What about knowledge that comes pre-Greek knowledge and understandings? We don't teach our children about that. And so we're always in this space where, and this is what happens around whiteness, is like whiteness and white supremacy is like, that is the standard. It's not. There was a whole lot more knowledge and understanding before this came into play. And yet we do not teach this in our science classrooms and other content areas. So for me, I'm trying to also understand and learn a little bit more for myself so that I'm able to give more specific examples around this and be able to have readings that I do outside of science education, that I can understand this a little bit more deeply. And so we have to do that. I think this is just one of maybe my mantra for our conversation is like, we got to do better. We have got to do better, as science educators, as educators in general. But that was one of the things that I thought about, like that scientific racism has always been there. I'm sure the same thing in Brazil and the things that are going on. This is also global. This is also a pandemic in terms of how we are harming and have harmed Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples for the sake of science.
Felicia, Nós estamos chegando já aqui ao final, né, da nossa hora de conversa, e eu queria chamar muita atenção, né, para como você, ao longo de toda a sua fala, reconhece, valoriza e nos estimula a incorporar, né, as experiências dos nossos estudantes, né, no que a gente chama, né, de trabalho curricular, no currículo. E, ao mesmo tempo, criar novas experiências para eles. Criar novos espaços cognitivos, sociais, né, sociopolíticos, para que eles possam se constituir, né, como cidadãos que têm uma relação com a ciência, e não simplesmente como pessoas que estão alienadas, né, do que é a ciência. Eu sei que você desenvolve um projeto, que é um projeto de, a gente talvez possa chamar de escrita científica, mas eu acho que é muito mais do que isso, não é? Porque é um projeto que estimula, não é, e pessoas, não é, a pensar, não é, e a praticar o que se chama de escrita científica. E eu acho que você mesma fez referência às questões relacionadas à alfabetização, ao letramento, não é, a science literacy, como importantes, vamos dizer assim, para todos os educadores em ciências, nas suas diferentes representações, professores, pesquisadores, educadores de museus. Eu acho que, de fato, é um dever nosso, não é? Cada vez mais procurar nos comunicarmos com o público, não é? Com os públicos, com os diversos públicos, não é? Que têm interesse, expectativa, né, em relação à ciência. E, nesse sentido, esse projeto que você desenvolve, eu acho que atende, não é, um pouco a essa necessidade, não é, que nós, como profissionais, temos. Eu queria que você falasse um pouco, não é, sobre ele, e que aproveitasse também esse tempo que a gente tem para comentar algum outro aspecto que você queira ressaltar, deixar alguma outra questão com a gente para pensar.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Isabel, and everyone in the audience and those who will be listening to this a little bit later. Thank you again so much for inviting me to be able to talk about what I do and, even the new learning that I'm doing. So I think part of it too is that we have to be open to learn and be open to learn new things. And I think being able to share that, whether, even if I wasn't in this forum to talk about it, I already shared these ideas with other people, to be able to help me to think about it. And I think that's what, even in this pandemic that we have to use Zoom and, we're not face to face with other people, but, it also affords us more opportunities to communicate and to be able to share, using social media, using tweets and different things of that sort to get messages out to people about the importance of being able to learn. And so I think in terms of a personal project for me, it is being able to use social media in a way that it informs and that it encourages. It lets people know about what I'm doing, and so that can possibly connect with me or to inspire people to do the things that they're doing or to share the things that they're doing. And again, and even having very personal connections with people as well, talking to them about what their interests are. What are you doing? How can I support you when you're in, all these different kinds of things. So I think for me, it is that idea of the social, not necessarily networking, but it's just the social interactions with one another that would it keeps me going, it keeps me moving, it keeps me inspired by the things that people are doing. So I think that's what we have to do more of. And as we continue to talk more, we learn, we are able to acknowledge where we have shortcomings in our understandings. It may even reveal your bias and assumptions that you hold. So all of that are opportunities to learn a little bit more about yourself and about people, and how you might be able to contribute to solutions and ideas creatively about the things that are going on with us locally and also globally. So I think I just want to end it with that. And again, it's just to kind of thank everybody again for the opportunity to speak with you this morning and to wish everyone well with everything that's going on. The connect back to an idea that I said a little bit earlier is right, like, people often want to have this great impact. Like, they want to be, you know, Apollo Freire, or they want to be, you know, huge. But, you know, start small. and I actually feel very comfortable in my smallness, you know, of the impact that I'm able to do, because you never know who I may have touched or who you may have touched will have that larger impact in the world. But, you know, I'm not afraid to dream big for other people, you know, as I dream about where my place is, and I'm okay. But I think people have to be able to just know that you have something to offer, and the world will lose out if you do not put in your personal contribution. So I encourage you all to do that, to come together with other people, to find your people, come together and make and support one another. And again, I just thank you all for the opportunity to be with you this morning. Thank you so much.
Nós é que te agradecemos pela disponibilidade e por nos instigar, né, com ideias, reflexões, por ser tão aberta, né, a poder conversar, e esperamos que essa seja uma primeira, né, conversa de muitas, que a gente possa dar continuidade, né, a essas discussões com o nosso grupo mais ampliado, né? Eu convido as pessoas, né, que estão na audiência, então, a visitarem a página da professora Felicia, conhecerem mais sobre o trabalho dela, os contatos dela estão lá, né? E agradeço, né, mais uma vez a ela, ao evento e a todos vocês, né, que estão aqui. Obrigada.
Bom, nós também agradecemos a presença da professora Isabel, da professora Felicia. Infelizmente, tudo que é bom dura pouco, né? E chegamos ao final aqui da nossa conversa, agradecendo as contribuições do público, as perguntas. Foi uma conversa muito rica que nós tivemos aqui essa tarde. Agradecemos também a nossa audiência no YouTube e no Facebook e as interações. E lembramos que as palestras ficarão disponíveis nas páginas, tanto do YouTube quanto do Facebook. E calma que o seminário ainda não acabou, porque hoje à noite, às 19 horas, teremos a 5ª sessão Diálogos, que contará com a participação de Walter Corran, autor de Paulo Freire, Mais do que Nunca, e uma conversa que vai ser conduzida pela professora Francine Pinhão, aqui da UFRJ, e mediada pela professora Paula Ramos, também da UFRJ. E a programação completa do seminário está disponível no site do evento. E convidamos também a todos que estão nos assistindo hoje para nos acompanhar nas mídias sociais do Nutes, no Instagram como Nutes UFRJ e no Facebook como Desigualdade na Educação. Mais uma vez, obrigada a todos e uma boa tarde. Até a próxima.